If you cut your hydrangea last year and got nothing but leaves this summer, stay with me for the next 20 minutes, because I'm about to save your plant from another wasted season. What you're about to hear is not a guess. It's not trim it back a little in spring advice from a random gardening blog. It's the exact set of rules that separates a hydrangea covered in blooms from a hydrangea that just sits there, being green and disappointing. Here's the hard truth first. If your hydrangea didn't flower, it probably wasn't the soil. It probably wasn't the fertilizer. It probably wasn't even the weather, even though that's the easiest thing to blame. 9 times out of 10, somebody picked up a pair of pruners at the wrong moment and cut off the very stems that were about to give them flowers. And the frustrating part is, it doesn't feel like a mistake while you're doing it. It feels responsible. It feels like good garden hygiene. Cut it back, tidy it up, get ready for next year. Except with hydrangeas, that instinct is exactly what wrecks the show. Here's why this plant trips up even experienced gardeners. Hydrangeas are not one plant with one set of rules. They're a whole family of different personalities, and each one keeps its flower buds in a different place, at a different time. Cut the wrong one at the wrong moment, and you're not pruning. You're erasing an entire summer of blooms before they ever had a chance to open. And because the plant doesn't die, because it still leaves out fine and looks perfectly healthy, most people never even connect the dots. They just assume hydrangeas are unreliable, or their soil is off, or their climate isn't right. It's usually none of that. So today, we're fixing this for good. 7 rules, laid out in the exact order you need to think about them. From the very first thing you check before you even pick up a tool, all the way through the precise angle of the final cut. By the time we're done, you'll be able to walk up to any hydrangea in any yard, identify what you're dealing with in about 10 seconds, and know with total confidence whether to prune it, when to prune it, and exactly where to make the cut. No more guessing, no more accidentally sabotaging your own garden. Let's get into it. Rule 1. Figure out which kind of wood your hydrangea blooms on. Everything in this video, every single rule that follows, depends entirely on this first one. If you only remember one thing from the next 20 minutes, remember this. And yet it's the step almost everyone skips, because it's not glamorous. It doesn't feel like doing anything, and it requires you to slow down before you start cutting. Here's the concept. A hydrangea makes next year's flowers in one of 2 ways, and the 2 ways are almost opposites of each other. Some hydrangeas set their flower buds on what's called old wood. That means sometime in late summer, right after this year's flowers have faded, the plant is already quietly building the buds for next year, right there on the existing stems. Those buds are microscopic at first. You'd never notice them. They sit tucked against the stem through fall, through winter, through every cold snap and frost, just waiting for spring to arrive so they can swell up and open. If you take pruners to those stems any time between fall and spring, you are physically removing flowers that already existed in miniature form. The plant won't die. It'll grow new leaves just fine. It simply won't flower, because you cut away the only buds it had. The classic examples of old wood bloomers are the big, round, pom-pom-style mop-head hydrangeas, along with their flatter, more delicate cousins called lace caps. Both of these fall under the umbrella term big-leaf hydrangea, and if you've ever seen a hydrangea with huge blue or pink globe-shaped flowers, that's almost certainly one of these. Oak-leaf hydrangeas are also old wood, easy to spot from their pointed, oak-shaped leaves and their cone-like flower clusters. Mountain hydrangeas, which look like a smaller, more refined lace cap, are old wood too, and so is the climbing hydrangea that some people grow up trellises and brick walls. Then there's the second group, the ones that bloom on new wood. These plants take a completely different strategy. Instead of pre-building buds and carrying them through winter, they wait. They go dormant, drop their leaves, sit bare through the cold months, and then in spring, they push out entirely fresh growth from scratch. The flowers form on that brand new growth, in the very same season it's produced. This is a huge difference, because it means you can cut these plants back hard, sometimes almost to ground level, and they will still reward you with a full flush of blooms just a few months later. The 2 most common new wood types are panicle hydrangeas, which produce those long, cone-shaped, almost ice cream swirl-looking flower clusters, and smooth hydrangeas, best known for the variety with enormous, snowball-sized white blooms. So before your pruners come anywhere near the plant, stop and ask yourself this one question. Is this an old wood bloomer or a new wood bloomer? If you're not 100% sure, don't guess. Snap a photo, check the tag if you still have it, or search the variety name. This single piece of information, more than watering, more than fertilizer, more than sun exposure, determines whether you get flowers or foliage next summer. Get this wrong, and nothing else in this video will save you. Rule 2. When you're unsure, the safest move is usually no move at all. I know this isn't the answer you were hoping for. You've got the pruners out, you're standing in front of the plant, you're ready to get to work. But if you take one thing away from years of hydrangea mistakes, let it be this. The big leaf mopheads, which happen to be the most commonly planted hydrangea of all, barely need pruning to begin with. This is a hard mental shift for a lot of gardeners, because we're conditioned by other plants. Roses want a hard annual cut. Fruit trees demand aggressive shaping every winter, so it feels natural to assume hydrangeas want the same treatment. They don't. A big leaf hydrangea that's left completely alone, aside from removing anything obviously dead, will often outbloom the identical plant next door that gets tidied up every fall. The only pruning these plants genuinely need is removing wood that's clearly dead or damaged, and occasionally thinning out a stem that's crossing awkwardly through the center of the shrub and blocking airflow. That's it. That's the whole maintenance list for most of the year. If you're standing there with your pruners debating whether to shape the plant, round it off, or cut it back just to keep it neat, the answer, almost every single time, is to put the tool down and walk away. I want to be direct about the mistake I see over and over because it's incredibly common. Someone shears their mophead hydrangea into a neat, compact ball every autumn because it looks tidy going into winter. It genuinely does look clean for a few weeks. Then summer arrives, and the plant produces almost no flowers, and the gardener is baffled, because from their perspective, they did everything right. They cleaned the plant up. What they actually did was remove every single flower bud the plant had prepared. Tidy is not the goal here. Blooms are the goal. And with old wood hydrangeas specifically, those two goals are frequently in direct conflict with each other. Restraint isn't laziness in this case. It's the single most important skill you can bring to this plant. Rule 3. Don't touch the faded flower heads until spring. This rule goes against every tidying instinct you have, which is exactly why so many people get it wrong. When autumn arrives and the blooms on your old wood hydrangea have gone from vibrant color to brown, papery, and crisp, your first reaction is almost certainly going to be to snip them off and clean the plant up before winter sets in. Don't do it. Leave them exactly where they are. Here's what's actually happening underneath those spent blooms. Directly below each faded flower head sits the tender new bud that's going to become next year's flower. That bud is small, soft, and genuinely vulnerable to a hard freeze. The dried flower cluster sitting above it, along with the section of stem it's attached to, functions almost like a tiny protective cap. It shields that fragile bud from the worst of the winter cold, from ice, from harsh wind. Strip the plant bare in October in the name of cleanliness, and you're exposing those unprotected buds to every single frost that comes through for the rest of the season. There's also a purely aesthetic bonus to leaving them on, which is worth mentioning because it makes the do-nothing advice easier to follow. A hydrangea covered in dried, faded flower heads, dusted with frost on a cold morning, is genuinely one of the most striking things you'll see in a winter garden. So you're not sacrificing anything by leaving them. You're gaining both protection for next year's flowers and a beautiful view for the next few months. The right time to finally clear those old blooms away is spring, once you can visibly see the buds beginning to swell and small green leaves starting to emerge. That's the plant telling you, in its own way, that the risk of a damaging frost has passed and it's safe to tidy up. Let the plant dictate that timing, not the calendar on your wall, and definitely not the urge to make the garden look neat before guests come over for Thanksgiving. Rule 4. Give new wood hydrangeas a permanent framework, instead of cutting them to the ground every year. Now we shift entirely to the other camp, the new wood bloomers, because with these plants, hard pruning isn't just acceptable, it's genuinely recommended. But there's a refinement here that most gardening advice completely leaves out, and it's the difference between a plant that flops over in the first summer storm and one that stands tall all season. The standard advice you'll hear for smooth hydrangeas, the type with the huge, round, white blooms, is to cut the entire plant down to just a few inches above the ground every single spring. And technically, this works. The plant regrows and flowers just fine. But here's the problem nobody warns you about. The fresh stems that shoot up from ground level are thin, soft, and green, essentially still growing wood, with no real strength to them. And then those same delicate stems are expected to hold up flower heads that can be the size of a grapefruit or bigger. The very first heavy rainstorm of the season comes through. The weight becomes too much, and the whole plant collapses flat onto the lawn. If you've grown one of these before, you already know this scene. Gorgeous white blooms lying face down in the mud, ruined within a single afternoon. The fix is simpler than you'd expect. Stop cutting the plant all the way down to soil level. Instead, leave behind a low, permanent framework of stems, somewhere in the range of 18 to 24 inches tall. Each spring, rather than chopping to the ground, you cut back to that same established framework. Over the course of a couple of growing seasons, those base stems thicken and harden into genuinely woody, sturdy supports. The new growth that rises up from them each year now has something solid underneath it to lean on, instead of trying to hold everything up on its own from bare soil. You end up with the exact same spectacular blooms, except now they stand upright through wind and rain, instead of collapsing after the first storm of the summer. Panicle hydrangeas follow a similar philosophy, though the details differ slightly. Because they also bloom on new wood, you prune them in late winter while the plant is still fully dormant, and you genuinely can cut them back with confidence to control their size and shape. But again, resist the urge to start from scratch every year. Work toward building a permanent skeleton of main stems, and each winter, cut the previous year's growth back to just a couple of buds above that established framework. You're not restarting the plant from zero every single spring. You're building a stronger, more structured skeleton that improves and thickens with every passing year. Rule 5. Understand the difference between deadheading and pruning, because confusing them costs you flowers. This is one of the most common points of confusion I hear about, and it's an easy trap to fall into because the two words get used interchangeably in casual conversation, even though they mean very different things to the plant. Deadheading simply means removing a single spent flower to keep the plant looking tidy while it's actively growing through summer. Pruning means making a deliberate cutback into the stem to control the plant's overall size and shape. The danger shows up when you intend to do a light, harmless deadhead, but you accidentally make a deep pruning cut instead, without realizing what you've done. Here's how to get it right every time. On an old wood hydrangea, once a bloom has finished for the season and you want to remove it for tidiness, don't just grab your pruners and cut wherever feels convenient. Follow that stem down with your eyes first. Just below the spent flower, you'll typically spot a healthy, plump pair of buds sitting directly opposite each other on the stem. That's your target. Make your cut just above that pair of buds and go no further down the stem than that. Those two buds are next year's flowers waiting to happen. Cut above them and you preserve them completely. Cut below them, deeper into older wood, and you've thrown away flowers you won't get back until the following year. So the rule to keep in your head is short and simple. Deadhead shallow. Take only the faded flower itself, along with the short stretch of stem directly above the first strong pair of buds. Nothing more. If you actually want to do a real, size-reducing prune on an old wood variety, timing matters enormously, and the ideal window is right after the plant finishes its bloom cycle for the summer. That's the one stretch of the year where the plant has enough time and energy left to recover and still set fresh buds before the season ends. Outside of that narrow window, on old wood types, any deep cut is a gamble with next year's flowers. Never let a quick summer tidy up accidentally turn into a hard structural prune, because on these particular plants, the depth of a single cut is what decides whether you see blooms next year. Rule 6. Fix an overgrown hydrangea from the bottom up, not the top down. Sooner or later, a lot of us end up with a hydrangea that's simply gotten out of hand. Maybe it's a plant you inherited with a new house, 10 or 15 years old, tall, woody, sprawling, and only flowering way up at the top, where you can barely even see the blooms. The obvious temptation is to grab the head shears and just flatten the whole thing down to a manageable size in one go. Please don't do that. Shearing the top off an overgrown hydrangea doesn't actually solve the underlying problem. All you end up with is a smaller version of the exact same tired, exhausted, woody plant, still full of old growth, that stopped producing quality flowers. The real fix requires patience, and it works from the bottom of the plant, spread out over roughly 3 years. Here's the method. Each year, walk through the plant and identify the very oldest, thickest, most woody stems, specifically the ones that have clearly stopped putting out strong flowers. Cut those particular stems all the way down to the base of the plant, right at ground level. The key restriction here is to remove no more than about a third of the plant's total stems in any single year. This forces the hydrangea to respond by sending up vigorous new growth from the base, all while the remaining 2/3 of the plant continues flowering as normal, so you're never left staring at a bare, embarrassing stump in the middle of your yard. In year 1, you take out the worst third of the old wood. In year 2, you go back in and remove the next worst third, and by this point, the first round of fresh new stems is already growing and strong. By year 3, you've completely cycled out all of that exhausted old wood and replaced it with young, vigorous growth, and the entire plant feels renewed, all without ever sacrificing an entire season's worth of blooms in the process. Slow, deliberate, and always from the base. That's how a genuinely overgrown hydrangea gets fixed properly. Fast and from the top is how it gets permanently ruined. Rule 7. Match your timing to the bloom type and always finish with a clean cut. This final rule ties every single thing we've covered together, and it comes in 2 parts: when you cut and how you cut. On timing, I want you to lock one simple sentence into your memory, because it covers almost every hydrangea you will ever encounter in your gardening life. If it blooms on old wood, prune it right after it finishes flowering in summer. If it blooms on new wood, prune it in late winter while it's still fully dormant. Old wood, summer, right after the show ends. New wood, late winter, right before the plant wakes back up. That one sentence resolves the vast majority of timing confusion people run into. There's one worthwhile exception to flag. Some of the newer, modern big-leaf hydrangea varieties have actually been bred to rebloom, meaning they flower on both old wood and new wood across the same growing season. With these particular varieties, you genuinely have a lot more flexibility, and it's much harder to go seriously wrong. Even so, the safest default approach is still to simply deadhead the spent blooms as they fade throughout the season, and otherwise leave the structural pruning alone. If you're ever unsure whether a big leaf variety is a reblooming type or a standard old wood type, just treat it as old wood by default. You'll rarely regret that assumption, and it protects you from the worst outcome. Now let's talk technique, because timing alone isn't enough if the actual cut is sloppy. Whatever you're cutting, make the cut clean. Use sharp bypass pruners rather than the dull anvil-style tools, because anvil pruners tend to crush and pinch the stem instead of slicing through it cleanly, leaving a ragged wound that takes the plant much longer to heal and that's more vulnerable to disease and rot. Angle your cut slightly and position it just above a healthy pair of buds or a leaf node so that rainwater naturally runs off the cut surface instead of pooling on top of it and causing rot. And one more habit that's easy to skip but genuinely matters. Before you move your pruners from one hydrangea to the next, wipe the blades down, ideally with a bit of rubbing alcohol on a cloth. This simple step keeps you from unknowingly transferring disease from one plant straight into a fresh, open wound on another. A clean, well-timed, well-placed cut heals quickly and pushes the plant's energy exactly where you want it to go. A crushed, badly timed cut does the opposite. It invites rot, costs you flowers, and puts unnecessary stress on a plant that was probably doing just fine before you picked up the pruners. It's the same handful of seconds of effort either way, but the outcome couldn't be more different. So let's bring all 7 of these together, because notice how deliberately they build on top of each other. You start by identifying whether your hydrangea blooms on old wood or new wood, because that single fact reshapes everything that follows. You hold back and default to no pruning at all whenever you're genuinely unsure. You leave the faded flower heads in place all the way through winter to protect next year's buds from frost damage. You build a permanent, sturdy framework on your new wood types instead of cutting them down to nothing every single spring. You deadhead shallow and prune deep, and you never, ever let the two blur together. You renovate an overgrown plant slowly and patiently from the base, never in one aggressive pass from the top. And you finish by matching your timing precisely to the bloom type and making every single cut clean. Follow these 7 rules, and the disappointing, bald summers stop for good. You'll start getting the kind of full, dense cloud of blooms these plants are genuinely capable of producing. The kind that makes a neighbor slow down while they're walking past your yard just to get a better look. Here's what I want you to actually do, right now, before you close this video and move on with your day. Go outside, walk up to your hydrangea, and figure out exactly one thing. Is it an old wood bloomer, or is it a new wood bloomer? That's genuinely the only homework I'm giving you. That one piece of knowledge, more than any tool in your shed, more than any fertilizer on the shelf, is what determines whether you're standing in front of a plant full of flowers next summer or a plant full of nothing but leaves again. If you're not sure which type you've got, drop a comment describing the shape of the flower, and I'll help you figure it out. And if this video just saved your hydrangea from another badly timed haircut, do me a favor and subscribe, because there's a lot more of this kind of practical, no-fluff gardening advice coming, and you won't want to miss it. I'll see you in the next one.